Everyone who ever watched Sister Wives and smiled at Truly Brown, everyone who ever shared a clip of her, laughed at something she said, felt protective of her during the hard seasons, or discussed her in a comment section, participated in something that nobody in this community has ever directly named. Not once. In 18 seasons of coverage, in thousands of hours of fan discussion, in millions of comments across Reddit and YouTube and every Sister Wives corner of the internet, this one thing has gone unaddressed. Today, that changes. Because Truly Brown is owed something by this audience. And it is not sympathy. It is something more specific, more uncomfortable, and far more actionable than that. If this is your first time on this channel, hit like and subscribe right now because this series has been building to this moment, and you do not want to be the person who finds it after everyone else already had the conversation. Let's start with what we all know, because it matters to establish it clearly before we go anywhere complicated. Truly Brown was born into Sister Wives in 2011. She did not choose this. She was not consulted. She arrived in the world as the youngest child of Kody Brown and Christine Brown. And from her very first appearance on camera, she became part of the content, part of the product, part of what kept millions of people tuning in season after season. She grew up in real time, on screen, through some of the most difficult years any child of this family has experienced. She was there for the Mary and Kody collapse. She was there for the move to Flagstaff. She was there when Christine's marriage to Kody began its long, painful deterioration. She was there for the divorce. All of it was filmed. All of it aired. All of it was watched by people who genuinely felt, that they cared about her. And here is where we need to slow down, because the caring was real. I am not here to tell you that Sister Wives fans are hypocrites or villains. The Sister Wives community is one of the most emotionally intelligent, analytically sophisticated fan communities in all of reality television. I have been in this space long enough to know that. The empathy is genuine. The protectiveness over the Brown children, and over Truly specifically, has been real and consistent, and at times, genuinely moving to witness. But genuine emotion and honest accounting are not the same thing. And today, we are doing honest accounting. When you invest emotionally in a child on a reality television show, when you watch them grow up, when you root for them, when you feel your heart break a little during the episodes where things are clearly wrong at home, you are in a relationship that only exists on one side. Truly Brown has never watched you watching her. She does not know your username. She does not know your opinions about her father, or your feelings about her mother's strength, or your relief when Christine found David and built something new. She does not know you exist. And yet, you have feelings about her childhood, her pain, her future, what she deserves, what was done to her. That asymmetry, the intimacy of the watching, without the consent of the watched, is what this entire conversation is built on. And until we name it clearly, we cannot talk honestly about what it means. Here's the thing that nobody wants to say out loud in a fan community. Every single viewer who ever expressed outrage about TLC exploiting the Brown children, every person who ever posted, "Those kids never asked for this," or "The network should be ashamed," also, by the act of watching, contributed to the exact commercial logic that made the exploitation profitable in the first place. That is not an accusation. It is just math. Sister Wives existed because people watched it. The cameras kept rolling for 18 seasons because the ratings justified the renewal. The ratings existed because an audience including the most empathetic, most truly protective, most children-first members of this fandom kept coming back. The audience and the exploitation were not separate forces in opposition to each other. They were the same force, experienced from different sides of the television screen. I want to stay with that for a moment because it is genuinely uncomfortable, and discomfort is exactly where the important stuff lives. The Sister Wives community has been one of the most vocal fan bases in all of reality TV when it comes to advocating for the children's well-being. The Reddit threads, the YouTube videos, the social media campaigns every time something happened on screen that crossed a visible line. That advocacy was real. It had genuine effects. The conversation that fan communities like this one forced into the public sphere around reality TV children is part of a larger cultural reckoning that is still ongoing. I do not want to dismiss that. I do not want to minimize it. But I also want to ask a harder question. When fans analyzed Truly's situation in detail, when they broke down the episodes, cataloged the moments where Kody was absent or dismissive, Documented Christine's growing isolation and what it meant for the kids, were they advocating for Truly? Or were they producing content about Truly's pain that happened to be framed in the language of advocacy? And is there a meaningful difference between those two things? I am not asking rhetorically. I am asking because I am doing exactly this right now, producing content about Truly Brown's situation framed in the language of accountability and advocacy. I am in this paradox with you. This video generates views. Views generate revenue. Revenue justifies more analysis of this family's story. I cannot step outside that system by naming it, but I can be honest about it while I am inside it. And I can try to make sure that what we build together here is something that goes beyond the content economy, something that actually serves the person whose story we keep returning to. So let's talk about what that actually looks like. Truly Brown does not need your sympathy. She has Christine. She has David. She has a mother who fought for years, in full view of a television audience, to give her daughter a stable, loving home, and who succeeded. Truly is not a victim waiting for an audience to save her. She is a 13-year-old girl building her life, and she is doing it with people who love her fiercely. She is not asking for anything from the SisterWives community. She is not on this fandom's radar in any way that requires her to be. What she cannot do for herself, what no child born into a reality television family can do for themselves, is advocate for the legal protections that would have changed what happened to her. And here is the part that I genuinely need you to sit with, because it surprised me when I went looking, and it will probably surprise you too. As of 2026, reality television child welfare protections in the United States remain dramatically inadequate compared to the protections afforded to child actors in scripted content. California passed legislation in 2023 that was widely reported as a step forward, and it was. But what that legislation primarily addresses is earnings protection, the money question. Whether children who appear on reality programming have their income protected in a Coogan-style account the way child actors in scripted film and television do. That is genuinely important. It is also not the whole problem. The specific scenario that produced Truly Brown's situation, a child filmed continuously during her parents' deteriorating marriage, captured in moments of emotional vulnerability and family collapse, aired for entertainment purposes to a national audience without any meaningful consent mechanism or welfare oversight. That scenario remains entirely legal in most of the United States. There is no federal framework that addresses it. There is no standard requiring welfare oversight during filming. There is no consent protection that accounts for what a child is capable of meaningfully agreeing to at 5 or 7 or 10 years old, which is nothing, by the way. Children cannot meaningfully consent to being filmed for a national television audience during their parents' divorce. The law in most of this country does not care about that. What Truly Brown was filmed through would still be legal today, in most states. Right now, while you are watching this video, there are children in reality television families being filmed through things they have not agreed to and cannot agree to, with no legal protection beyond whatever their parents choose to provide. And some of those parents are, as we have discussed at length in this series, not always choosing correctly. That is the gap. That is the specific, actionable, concrete gap that exists between caring about Truly Brown's story and doing something that would actually matter to the next child who is born into it. And this is where the SisterWives community specifically becomes genuinely important. Not as content consumers, as a constituency. The SisterWives fandom is large. It is engaging. It is organized enough to coordinate around narratives, around theories, around advocacy for characters it cares about. It has demonstrated, across years of existence, an ability to generate attention and direct it towards specific things. That is a form of power. It is a form of power that fan communities rarely recognize in themselves, because the word fandom carries connotations of passivity. You are the audience, not the actor. But audiences with numbers and engagement are not passive. They are potential constituencies. And constituencies, when they are organized around a specific and achievable goal, change things. Reality TV child welfare advocacy organizations exist. They are underfunded. They are under-amplified. They are doing serious work with far fewer resources and far less public attention than they deserve. One share from a community the size of the SisterWives fandom reaches more people than most of these organizations reach in a month of their own outreach. That is not an exaggeration. That is just what large, engaged fan communities can do when they decide that caring about someone means something more than watching content about them. The gap between caring and acting is the gap that the next Truly Brown will fall through. And closing it does not require you to become an activist or a lobbyist or someone who dedicates their life to this cause. It requires one thing beyond what you are already doing. One share. One message to a representative. One post that redirects the community's attention from analyzing Truly's story to protecting someone who has not yet been through it. That is what Truly Brown's story is owed by the audience that watched it. Not more feelings, not more content, not more empathy expressed in comment sections where it builds community but changes nothing. Action. Specific, directed, achievable action that converts the caring this community already has into something that outlasts a season, outlasts a series finale, outlasts the news cycle around whatever SisterWives does next. We are going to get into exactly what that looks like, the organizations, the specific advocacy, the legislative state of play, and the prediction I have about where this is all going in the second part of this video. But before we get there, I want to ask you something. You have watched this family for years. You have invested real emotional energy in these children, including Truly. That investment is not nothing. It is not meaningless. It is just, right now, primarily producing feelings and content rather than change. The question this series has been building toward is whether you are willing to add one more thing to the investment. One action. One thing beyond watching and discussing and caring. Stay with me, because part 2 is where we name exactly what that action is and why the SisterWives community specifically is positioned to make it matter. The second part is starting now. Let me tell you about a moment that happened in SisterWives that most fans remember, but almost nobody has analyzed from the angle I am about to use. There is an episode, and if you have watched this show with any seriousness, you will know exactly what I'm referring to without me having to give you the season number, where Truly Brown is on screen during a moment that is clearly unmistakably painful for her. Not dramatically painful in the way that makes for clean television, quietly painful. The kind of pain that a child carries in her face when she does not fully understand what is happening around her, but understands enough to know that something is wrong. Something is broken. Something in her world is not the way it is supposed to be. And the camera stayed on her. The camera stayed on her face. The director kept rolling. TLC kept that footage. And then they aired it. And then millions of people watched it. And then those millions of people had feelings about it. Protective feelings, outraged feelings, heartbroken feelings, and they expressed those feelings in forums and comment sections and YouTube videos. And the cycle continued, and the show was renewed, and Truly Brown kept appearing on screen. I want you to hold that sequence in your mind as we go through this second part. Not because it is unique to Truly, it is not. It happened with other children on this show and on dozens of shows like it. I want you to hold it because it is the clearest possible illustration of the thing we have to understand before we can talk about what comes next. The camera stayed on her because staying on her was profitable. It was profitable because people watched. People watched because they cared. The caring and the filming and the profiting and the watching were all part of the same unbroken circle. And nobody, not TLC, not the production company, not the network standards department, and not the legal framework governing any of it, was required to ask whether any of this was okay with the child at the center of it. That is where we are. That is the honest starting point. Now, let me tell you where this has to go. The child performer protections that exist in the United States, specifically the Coogan Law and its various state-level extensions, were created because of a child actor named Jackie Coogan, who earned millions of dollars in the silent film era and discovered as an adult that his parents had spent almost all of it. The law that now protects child actors' earnings was written in response to a specific documented harm. It took a real child, a real injury, and a real public reckoning to produce legal protection. That is how this tends to work in America. The law responds to documented harm after the fact. It rarely anticipates harm before it happens. Truly Brown is the documented harm that the next version of this law needs to be written in response to. Not just Truly, there are others, and we will name the pattern without exploiting individual stories. But Truly's situation is among the most clearly documented, most publicly visible, most analytically available examples of what happens to a child when the existing legal framework is not adequate to protect them. She was filmed. She was aired. She was not protected by any meaningful consent mechanism. She experienced a family collapse in full view of a national audience, and none of it was illegal. Every single part of it was completely, entirely, legally permitted. The California legislation that passed in 2023, Senate Bill 764, was a genuine step. I want to be accurate about this because accuracy matters, and because overclaiming what has been achieved is as counterproductive as dismissing it. SB 764 extended Coogan-style earnings protections to minors who appear in family vlogging content and certain categories of reality programming. It requires that a percentage of earnings generated by content featuring minors be set aside in a protected trust account. It is meaningful. It is a real protection that did not exist before it passed. But here's what it does not do. It does not address consent. It does not create a welfare oversight mechanism during filming. It does not require any independent advocate for the child's interests during production. It does not address what happens when the content being filmed is not about the child earning money, but about the child's family falling apart when the revenue flows to the adults, and the network, and the production company, and the child is simply present in the footage as a byproduct of filming the family they were born into. Kody Brown was not a cast member in the way an adult chooses to be a cast member. She was an inhabitant of a home that happened to be a filming location. The law, as it currently exists, even in California, does not have a clean answer for that distinction. Federal legislation addressing reality TV child welfare has been proposed and has not advanced. The conversations happen. The advocates do the work. The problem is that the political will is not there. Not because the issue is controversial, but because it is not a priority. It does not have a constituency large enough to generate the kind of sustained pressure that moves legislation forward. Environmental advocacy has constituencies. Gun legislation has constituencies. Reality TV child welfare does not yet have one, and constituencies are built from communities that already care about an issue and can be organized around it. The SisterWives community is exactly that kind of community. I am not being flattering for the sake of flattery here. I have watched this fandom operate over years of covering this show, and what distinguishes it from many other reality TV fanbases is a quality of sustained, analytical, genuinely invested attention that does not fade when a season ends. SisterWives fans do not move on cleanly. They stay with the stories. They follow the people. They track what happens after the cameras stop rolling. They found out about Christine and David's engagement through exactly the kind of sustained attention that most fan communities drop after a finale. That staying power and quality of continued care is what makes this community a genuine candidate for organized advocacy rather than just an engaged viewership. And I want to be specific about what organized advocacy actually looks like at the individual level, because one of the reasons fan communities do not convert into advocacy communities is that advocacy sounds like a full-time job. It is not. Let me tell you exactly what it is. There is an organization called the Campaign for a Commercial-Free Childhood, now operating under the name Fair Play, that has been among the most consistent and credible voices advocating for children's rights in commercial media contexts, including reality television. They have produced research, they have engaged with legislators, they have the infrastructure to convert public attention into political pressure. Finding them takes 30 seconds. Sharing one of their posts takes another 30 seconds. That minute of your time, multiplied across even a fraction of this community, produces something those organizations cannot produce on their own reach. Visibility. The sense, in the offices of legislators who track public attention, that this issue has a constituency. There are advocacy efforts specifically targeting reality TV child welfare at the federal level. The organizations doing this work are not hard to find if you look for them. A search for reality TV child labor protections will surface the ongoing advocacy landscape in about 2 minutes. 2 minutes. And then you can decide what one action looks like for you. It might be a share, it might be a signature on a petition. It might be a message to your congressional representative, which, by the way, takes about 4 minutes using the contact forms on their official websites, and is vastly more effective than most people believe. Constituent contact matters. It is tracked. It is tallied. It influences what legislators believe their constituents care about. If enough people in enough districts contact the representatives about the same issue, it registers as a priority. That is how the system actually works. The SisterWives audience is distributed across enough congressional districts that coordinated contact would register. I want you to understand that concretely. This is not a hypothetical about what audiences could theoretically do. This is a description of a mechanism that functions, and that this community is large enough to activate. Now, let me tell you what I believe is going to happen, because this series has always been as much about prediction as about analysis. And I want to go on record about where I think this is going. Within the next 5 years, I believe that reality television child welfare legislation will advance meaningfully at the federal level in the United States. I believe this not because I am an optimist by nature, but because the conditions for it are assembling in ways that are visible if you track the right indicators. The family vlogging conversation of the public reckoning around channels that built audiences by filming their children without adequate consideration of those children's long-term interests has already shifted public opinion significantly. The academic and journalistic attention to reality TV children's outcomes is increasing. The first generation of reality TV children, who are now adults and able to speak publicly about their experiences, is speaking. The groundwork is being laid. What the groundwork needs, what every successful legislative push needs at some point, is a moment of organized, visible, sustained public pressure that signals to legislators that a real constituency cares about this outcome. Fan communities have provided that moment for other causes. They have organized letter-writing campaigns, petition drives, targeted social media pressure, and direct constituent contact around issues connected to the stories and people they care about. It works. It is documented. It is a real mechanism. The SisterWives community, motivated by Truly's story, by the Brown children's stories, by 18 seasons of watching a family navigate a structure that did not adequately protect its youngest members, is positioned to be part of that moment. Not the whole movement, part of it. One community among several that together constitute a constituency large enough to matter. That is the prediction, and I genuinely believe it, not as content, as a conclusion drawn from watching how these things actually develop. Now, I want to come back to something I said in part 1, because I want to close the loop on it, and I want to close it honestly. I said this video is part of the ecosystem it is critiquing. That is still true. Analyzing Truly Brown's story generates views. I am doing it. You are watching it. We are both inside the paradox. And I am not going to pretend that naming the paradox resolves it, because it does not. What naming it does is give us the option to do something different with the engagement than we would have done if it remained unnamed. The debt this audience owes Truly Brown is not guilt. Guilt is self-centered. Guilt makes you the subject of the story and moves her back to the periphery, which is where she has always been from the audience's perspective. Peripheral to your emotional experience of this show, even when she was the most visible person on screen. Guilt keeps you at the center. That is not what she is owed. What she is owed is the thing that costs you something smaller than guilt and produces something larger. One action, taken after you close this tab, not in place of watching or discussing or engaging with this community in addition to it. One thing that converts caring from a feeling into a fact, because feelings are internal. Facts change things. She is 13 years old. She is not watching this video. She does not need your feelings about her childhood. She is living forward from it. With Christine, with David, with whatever her life is building into. She is fine in a way that is genuinely remarkable given everything this series has documented. And the reason she is fine has almost nothing to do with the audience that watched her, and almost everything to do with a mother who refused to let the cameras be the defining fact of her daughter's life. What she cannot do, what Christine cannot do, what David cannot do, what none of the adults who love her can do, is retroactively create the legal protections that would have changed what was possible during the years those cameras were rolling. That window is closed, but the window for the next child is open. And this community can help close it the right way, by making it legally impossible for a network to do to another child what was done to Truly Brown without consent protections, welfare oversight, and meaningful legal recourse. That is the thing she is owed. Not from Christine, not from TLC, not from Kody, though that conversation belongs in a different video. From the audience. From you. From every person who ever watched the show and let Truly Brown into their emotional life without asking what that meant or what it required. It requires one thing. After this video ends, look up Fair Play, which is the organization formerly known as Campaign for a Commercial-Free Childhood. Look up reality TV child welfare legislation and find what is currently active at the state or federal level. Find one thing to share. Find one representative to contact. Find one petition that is gathering signatures. And do it, not because it will change the world by itself, because one action multiplied across a community this size is not one action anymore. It is a constituency, and constituencies change laws. If you do that, if you take one action after this video that is directed at protecting the next child who gets born into a reality TV family, drop a checkmark in the comments. Just the checkmark. No explanation, no essay. Just the checkmark, because I will know what it means. This community will know what it means. And more importantly, you will know what it means. You will know that watching Truly Brown grow up on a screen translated into something real, something outside the screen, something that functions in the world whether or not any camera is rolling. That is what this series has been building toward. Not a conclusion about Kody, not a verdict on TLC, not a final analysis of Christine's choices or Mary's story or the structure of plural marriage. Those conversations have their place, and we have had them. But the thing this series was always pointing toward underneath everything else was this: the audience question. The question of what it means to care about someone you have never met, whose childhood you consumed without their permission, whose pain generated content that generated views, that generated revenue, that generated more filming. What does it mean to care about that person? What does caring require? It requires this: one action. Today, subscribe to this channel because Top It 28 is the penultimate entry in this series, and it is the one that pulls every thread together. Kody, Christine, Mary, Janelle, Robin, the structure of the family, the arc of 18 seasons, and what all of it means taken as a complete thing rather than a collection of dramatic moments. It is the episode where everything lands. You do not want to find it after it posts. Subscribe so it comes to you. And then close this tab and do one thing. Not for me, not for the channel, not for the SisterWives community, or the content economy, or the ongoing discourse around this family. For the next Truly Brown, who has not been born yet, who will be born into a camera-filled home before this decade is out, who deserves, who is legally owed, in a world where the law works the way it should, the protection that Truly never had. That child is the point. That child has always been the point. And this audience, this specific, engaged, emotionally invested, analytically sophisticated community is one of the few fan communities in all of reality television that is actually capable of being part of making that protection real.